Hello everybody, welcome into Great Atmosphere here on February 9th of 2024. We're going to start out today here in southern Wisconsin. Had a little bit of a shortwave trough system pull into the upper Midwestern regions of the U.S. yesterday and actually led to quite a few local storm reports. Interestingly enough, we have quite a few hail reports extending all the way from central Illinois and eastern Iowa all the way across Lake Michigan and over into central Michigan itself to the Grand Rapids region, but most notably, you see a couple of red triangles right there, and that denotes possible tornado sightings in Wisconsin in February, which on from a record standpoint has never happened before. We've never seen a tornado report in Wisconsin in the month of February since National Weather Service has been keeping track of things like that, which I think is something that goes back to 1950-ish or about then. So I know it's only been 75 years, since 75-ish years since that record has stood, but certainly interesting, and it's not every day that you get a new monthly record out of it. So just thought that was a little interesting tidbit to start off with today. Weather has moved out of that region and everything looks good in that department now. I also want to take a quick look at the drought monitor and just doing a little quick winter review as of right now. This is what the drought monitor looked like as we went into the winter. This is or the wintry months. I believe this one starts. This map you're seeing started on Halloween of last year. You can see exceptional drought conditions through the majority of the Deep South, mainly in Louisiana and Mississippi, and then that extends through the majority of the Tennessee River Valley and into upstate of South Carolina and into the Piedmont regions of the Mid-Atlantic and Virginia, North Carolina. And you can see that it's been a very wet winter. We see a majority of the drought primarily in that Deep South region, and the majority of the Southeast as a whole had a quite moist winter thus far. Nothing in the terms of the wintry stuff by chance, but certainly in terms of rain, and knocked down that drought quite considerably. In addition to the drought that might have existed in the Pacific Northwest and the upper regions of the Sierra Nevada, or the northern regions of the Sierra Nevada in California and Nevada. So yeah, it's interesting just to look and see where we've been. I know it's not been the most exciting winter by all means in terms of the wintry stuff in the southeast, but it's certainly done a lot to recede a lot of those drought conditions that we've seen over the course of the past 6 months or so. Taking a look right now of the True Color satellite imagery, thanks to Goes East. We can see that we, generally speaking, have that subtropical jet that has been just chugging along as it normally would in an El Nino year, making its way a little bit further north now. So typically we would see surface high pressure dominating off the Carolina coast around this time of year, and it seems that high pressure system has actually moved a little bit further south into the Caribbean Sea and actually opened up quite a bit of sunshine over the state of Florida. Actually, one of the most interesting things I think out of that is, so this is called the solar flux anomaly map, and essentially this measures how much sunlight that a particular area has seen over the course of a month. So over the past month, areas that you see in blue have been largely underneath cloud cover, haven't seen the sun, and areas that you see in yellows and oranges are areas that you have seen more sun that is average. So you see across the majority of the southeastern tier, we have it's about average, but also I'd say more catering towards a little bit more sunny, and I think that's reflective and verified. And then the most area that has seen the most sun has been in the northern states of Mexico and central Texas and the High Plains regions, but largely the Midwest generally speaking, in the Northeast. This is the cloudy time of year for them. So nothing crazy out of that part of view. And then the West has obviously been inundated with various different atmospheric rivers and ice storms over the course of the winter so far. But interestingly enough, the area that has seen the least amount of sun is Central Florida, and that's primarily due to that subtropical jet just streaming on overhead, producing quite a bit of rainfall and just prohibiting sunlight from reaching the surface. So it's a great day for Florida now, because you see that subtropical jet has largely moved further north, which means that we can see sun here in Florida for at least the foreseeable future. So that's a good thing in that regard. As far as looking at the radar reflectivity across the United States, the majority of the rainfall right now is going across the length of Tennessee, along that frontal boundary that we saw, and by way of that subtropical jet. And ultimately, that is going to be the main weather maker, troublemaker, going into the weekend. We also take a look at water vapor imagery to get a better understanding of what that subtropical jet looks like as it extends from the eastern Pacific all the way in. Now, you'll remember that we had a quite significant atmospheric river event that occurred over the southern tier of California earlier this week. This is also an end result of that. You can see that river is still going strong. It's just a little bit more spread out, and ultimately not as pronounced as it goes over some higher altitudes over in the northwestern regions of Mexico and the Rocky Mountains. So we'll take a look at what the surface map currently looks like. We have our primary surface low, which has our trough that's extending down in a positively tilted neutral state. If I can figure out my drawings here real quick. Here we go. So we have our main low right here, and then the primary extension kind of going like this across the whole of the tier of the central U.S. We can see, as denoted by these blue and red lines, those are temperatures denoted by degrees Celsius. So in areas that are in the blue region, and this is at the 850 millibar level, by the way. Those are areas that are below freezing, and then or actually, is this surface? No, that's 850. Sorry about that. So you see the cold air is predominantly coming in from the Canadian prairies, like so, and thus being advected in from the northwest. And then we have out ahead of it, we have a very strong flow pattern that brings up a little bit more warmer air up and in through by way of the subtropical jet all the way into the southeast and even to the northeast. I know there were some areas that reached the 60s in Ohio today, and I believe southern Illinois and the St. Louis region actually might peak at 72 today. So these are incredibly anomalous temperatures for the Midwestern region today, but those will soon come to an end as this cold front pattern starts to move forward in time. And we can see what that generally looks like here based on the 24-hour change in surface temperature. We can see going into today is largely anomalous, and then as we go into tonight, we see that cold air start to make its way a little bit further to the south and to the east, but ultimately not getting too far before it starts to occlude and ultimately start to fizzle out, which is certainly not what we were expecting a little earlier. We'll get into the reasonings why as to this phenomenon is happening later on in the video, but ultimately that is the current steering pattern that we're dealing with. And you can see as that low center is probably sitting about right there, cold front extends like so, but ultimately it's already working to occlude quite a bit. And actually, it's probably not even like this. If I was a betting man, it's probably looking a little bit more like this, right? And then the warm front is right here, extending. And when that happens, we have what's called an occlusion that occurs right over Lake Superior right there. And ultimately, the low starts to fill in and lose a lot of its potential energy that it would otherwise be using to force more cold air down into the south. But due to that ridging by way of the jet, it's kind of preventing a lot of potential cooling that we would get in the southeast. Not a lot of forcing, excuse me, quite a bit of forcing, I should say, in the northern areas, Canadian prairie, up in Alaska and Greenland. A lot of shifts currently occurring, but in the southern tier, it's largely very zonal and strong zonal wind that is keeping everything kind of in place. And in terms of temperatures, let's take a look at what the past few weeks has been. So dating back from the period of January 23rd all the way until now, February 8th, this is the average temperature ranks by climate district. So if you were to take like that 23rd of January to February 8th slice and compare that time frame to 132 years at the same time frame each year, this would show you how hot or cold the current years would compare to the rest of the 131 years. And currently across all of pretty much the Dakotas, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, these are all top 5, if not the warmest 3-week timed periods for this particular time period that we've ever seen. So it's an exceptionally warm past few weeks for this area. I know if we were to extend this map out a little bit more into the winter, it'd be probably around more top 15, top 20 in terms of warm winters as a whole. But at least for the past few weeks, this just goes to show, and it's not even just that. I mean, like, this is considerable across the majority of the United States. There's nowhere here that's even, in some regions of Florida, we're obviously a little bit cooler by virtue of that extreme cloudiness that they've seen. Not a lot of solar heating going on in that particular region, in addition to the areas that have seen atmospheric rivers in California. But largely the entire United States is generally in a top 20 warmest 3-week period right there. So that's just what you kind of been experiencing over the past few weeks, just to give you a little bit of perspective. So right now we're going to take a look at what the upper level jet looks like. We have our upper jet, the remains of the atmospheric river event making its way across the southern tier of the U.S. at the moment. And then we have our impressive ridging that's going and inserting itself into British Columbia, the Northwest Territories of Canada, up and into Alaska. And then we can see that the main jet streak anomaly occurs off of the coast of Japan right now, as the North Pacific jet is currently in a retraction, which means we'll be starting to get more retraction-like weather here in about 7 to 10 days' time here in terms of the lag time differential for the southeast U.S. But we will also take a look at what this is going to look like in terms of the future. We can see that this streak starts to move further and further out into the east, but also you see the majority of that. These are high winds. These are 200 knot winds up at the 200 hectopascal region of the upper atmosphere, about 12 kilometers up in the atmosphere. I don't know why I said 5. And ultimately, there's got to be a lot of flights that take advantage of this, I'm sure. Don't want to turn down an extra 200 knots tailwind when you're coming from from Japan or Korea or wherever. But ultimately, it's going to make its way back over into our region here in the U.S. going into early parts of next week, and this that's the split flow that we're used to. This is another high over low situation over the Rocky Mountains. And then we have our major Aleutian low that's sitting off of the Aleutian Islands, and ultimately it's going to spark another atmospheric river event as we go forward into the latter portions of next week. The CPC has already issued a hazardous precipitation warning for next week as we go into it. Generally speaking, it's saying the majority of all of California, kind of centered on the Central Valley, is expecting another round of heavy precip and heavy snow for the Sierra Nevada, in addition to some katabatic winds off and into the leeward side of the mountains there. And you can see we'll probably get a lot more. Guidance as to what this is going to look like going into next week. But ultimately, this is the water tables here in California. They're pretty much full reservoir-wise. This is kind of the most water that they've had in those particular water tables for quite some time, at least in the past 30-40 years. So they don't have to worry about drought or anything in that particular region right now. It's just kind of making sure that they're not getting too much rainfall and precipitation all at once, and obviously that can lead to flash flooding, landslides, and other things. And just because not as many trees over in the western tier of the U.S. obviously than we're used to here in the southeast, that's why you do get more landslides and whatnot, just because the root systems that you would otherwise have in the Appalachian Mountains would keep a lot of those soils together, and when you just don't have that and you have more rocky soil, landslides are generally much more, or rockfalls and landslides are much more common on the western side of the U.S. Taking a look a little bit further down in the atmosphere at the 500 hectopascal region, this one's about 5 kilometers up in the atmosphere. You can see that there's quite a bit of undulation. We see that that high pressure has shifted down into the Caribbean Sea over Cuba and Jamaica, and ultimately that's serving to, well, actually, if it was sitting right here, which is what it's typically been doing, the majority of the high pressure circulation would come in like this pattern, and that brings in a lot more moisture, and ultimately when it starts to interact with cold air, that would create a much more significant severe event, typically. And not saying there won't be a severe event. In this case, it's just kind of a different setup. So in this particular scenario, instead, we have the high pressure that's circulating over the island of Hispaniola, and then going to it goes over the Yucatan and the majority of Mexico. Not a lot of forcing associated with it. The majority of it will come from the subtropical jet aloft, but ultimately the driving pattern will still be kind of in this general southwesterly flow kind of rendition, and the ultimate determinator ultimately is going to be dictating where this comes in are these little short waves that you see all around in here. So you got a short wave trough here, you got another short wave here, another short wave here, another short wave here. They're just kind of like sporadically everywhere. One on the Snake River, one up here. So I mean, like, there's a lot of areas where this system could get it together, and we don't really know which one of these is going to be the major coalescing. The one that is, I guess, the most quote-unquote dangerous would be this one here, just because if we move forward, I'm not sure if this is going to verify. Okay, so it actually does verify according to this particular guidance. Kind of a weird thing. I'd say this is kind of an artifact right now. I wouldn't say that's anything particularly concerning up in the northern tier, but this is concerning because this determines that that southerly portion of the shortwave trough lows that are forming over the weekend, they're going to move more in the southern tier, and when you couple that and move that against both the flow of the high and the subtropics and the subtropical jet, and then you have a shortwave trough that comes here, you get more of this kind of neutrally tilted jet pattern or trough pattern, which will ultimately induce more meridional flow, which goes in direct. Because, well, if you have flow that's going like this in the if you have flow that's going like that in the mid levels, and then you have flow that's going like that in the lower levels, that is the quintessential wind shear. And anytime you get wind shear and high storm relative helicity values like that, you would expect a little bit more of a severe threat. So let's take a little bit more of a closer look on as to what that looks like. So you can see with the neutrally or the positively tilted trough, we get much more of a rain shield event occurring over the weekend. Not a lot to talk about in terms of severe weather. It's just on this back end, you see that lows start to form around itself. Cold air starts to get inserted and injected on the eastward side of the system, with the low, if it forms like right here, cold air coming down and putting more snow in the panhandle region of Texas and the upper elevations in Mexico. That'll move forward in time. Of course, we're looking at the 60K NAM, and you can see out ahead of it, you can see much more discrete, probably supercellular activity out in the northern tier in Louisiana and central Mississippi as we go into the day on Sunday. Actually pulled a sounding that comes from around the Jackson, Mississippi area. Just wanted to kind of see what this kind of looked like. We have a couple things to note on this particular sounding. We have obviously our veering winds starting at the surface from the south, moving to the southwest, and increasing from about 10 knots to about 50 knots over the course of the in the course of the elevated mix layer, which actually is pretty deep, extends all the way up into about 3 kilometers in the atmosphere. As far as convective energy is concerned, had quite a bit of a mix layer, about 800 mix layer cape, more than enough to get started with some convective initiation. Not a lot of inhibition in the atmosphere there. Elevated PWatts at 1.36 inches. We also have very, very high D cape, so this is D cape would kind of be your downdraft cape in that respect. So you get a lot more forcing from the upper atmosphere that's bringing down cold air behind it. Very common with these wintry cold core systems, and they're 887 D cape is quite considerable. Would expect quite a bit of winds at the surface with this, particularly in areas of isolated supercellular activity. Also, we had to take a look at 3 cape. 3 cape is what you look at primarily for. I like to look at 3 cape for tornado chances. It's the amount of convective potential energy in the lowest 3 kilometers of the atmosphere only, which obviously that's where tornadoes form. So it's quite elevated in terms of 3 cape. Usually, I get concerned about it when it hits about 30, 40, 50. That's kind of like the minimum tier range. But the main story, I think, will be these SRH values. Well over 300 knots of SR, or I shouldn't say knots, it's square meters per second squared, I believe is what the unit is. Anyway, so that's well over 300. That's more than enough in terms of getting enough effective inflow in terms of helicity in this particular setup. Also, we have more of a it's a streamwise vorticity pattern. So we see that the main bunker level goes in this particular direction, and then if you were to draw a 90 degree to the left of the wind vector pattern, you can see they're pretty much parallel to each other right there if you were to draw that line out, which is a indicator that definitely something, if a supercell thunderstorm were to form out ahead of the frontal boundary, we would expect some form of rotation to occur in that particular circumstance, which is why the possible hazard type is denoted as a tornado for this particular sounding. So there's a mesoscale analysis for you. So that'll be mainly impacting areas of, I believe, do I have it pulled up here? We can probably see it real quick. Yeah, we'll look at the Day 3 convective outlook. I believe that's when we were talking about this. Yep. So, right on cue, we have a slight risk that's formed over Louisiana and central Mississippi, over and extending into the Waco regions of Texas. And I believe that College Station is right around there as well. So, something to keep in mind as we move into Sunday into Monday. And then we'll take a look at some of the long range, because it's not the severe threat on Monday is not the only story. It's what happens on Monday, Tuesday that's going to be a more significant point of view here. So we're going to move into Monday, and here's the deal. Both models are now saying there is some form of winter storm that will be affecting the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast going into Monday and Tuesday. There's a lot of disagreement still, but ultimately both models are settling that there is going to be snow somewhere. We just don't know, and how, like, we don't know little semantics. And when I say semantics, ultimately, I had something pulled up here. So here's the ensemble mean low pressure centers according to the Euro ensemble. So when we move forward in time, we can see all this is Saturday, Sunday. We can see that low. Anything that is in lighter colors here denotes lower confidence, and anything that's in these dark blue colors that you see pretty much everywhere across this map kind of simulates more confidence, or regular blue colors, high confidence. Greens, generally speaking, more green things, lower confidence. All right, so we move forward. We see, generally speaking, they know that low is going to track over these Mississippi, Tennessee River Valley as we go forward, and then it hits the Appalachians, and we don't really know after that where that low is going to end up. Some have it taking a more northerly track as we go into the Alleghenies, and then it has some that form on the lee side of the Appalachians into the Piedmont of the Carolinas and Virginia, moving over the Chesapeake and out and into the Gulf Stream waters, which would be more conducive for, I would say, a I-95 nor'easter, which is what everyone kind of wants to see, meteorologically at least. Maybe not the city planners and whatnot, and others in that field, but at least I know for colleagues in the New York area who have yet to see snow this year, I think that's definitely what they would want. So essentially what this means is, if it takes a more northern tier, or a more northern, if the low center tracks more north, It's going to have a little bit of a harder time getting the right moisture convergence. The cold air is going to stay more further north, so you're going to have more rain along the I-95 corridor, and then ultimately it's going to be more of an upstate New York, higher elevation kind of deal. And then you'll have, if it hits that button, now we've talked about the button before, it's about 50 miles to the south of Martha's Vineyard, or I guess Cape Cod. If it were like right about there, I don't know why that is still there. I'm gonna have to look at that. So anyway, so if that was, why is it giving me a lat long right there? I have no idea. Anyway, so if it was right there, at the low center is right there, that means that the majority, it'll get Gulf Stream moisture coming across here. It'll have it, since it's on the northwest, the majority of that forcing pattern, and depending on how tightly packed it is in terms of isotherm gradient, or geopotential height gradient, I should say. When those lines are very closely packed together, it simulates more wind, a lot more forcing, a lot more energy to bring in colder air. And if it's on the northwest side of the low center, that means that the areas in that region will be in the cold. In addition, be getting the majority of the moisture as well. And the more tightly packed together, the more convective initiation there will be in the first place to be able to dump snow in that region. So that's what everyone, I guess, is quote-unquote hoping for. There's certainly quite a bit of differentiation, according to the Euro ensemble here, quite a bit of spread in terms of where that lands. It'll be interesting to watch throughout the weekend, and certainly something to look at on Monday when we make our next video, and what that'll look like. But that's certainly what everyone is currently looking at. But we'll move forward, and you can see that there's quite a bit of rain that'll fall over the southeast at our neck of the woods as well. You can see the majority of the rain. It's pretty much the majority of the weekend is going to be seeing some form of rain. Maybe get a little bit of a respite early in the day tomorrow on Saturday, but Saturday afternoon all the way through Super Bowl Sunday, it's going to be largely a soaker here in the southeast, which is fine. We're on that 7 to 10 day ish pattern for rainfall, which is completely normal for this time of year, and then it moves off and creates that winter system into the early parts of next week. And we start to go a little bit more zonal into the middle parts of next week, more sunny, more mild and seasonal conditions, before we look at our next troublemaker that'll form over in the majority of next weekend as well. Very typical this time of year to be in that kind of a pattern, and we also see the building in of the new atmospheric river event via the jet extension in the North Pacific, impacting the beginnings of California going into the weekend next. Take a look at what the precipitation totals are going to be in that particular part of the woods. We can see as we go forward through the weekend, in some localized areas, particularly along the deep south, could get about 3 inches, maybe a little bit more. Across the Carolinas, about 1.5 inches up to 2 in most areas, and lower amounts as you go into the northeast. But of course, those will be amplified if we do get some winter precipitation. Interesting thing going on with the polar vortex. Definitely a sudden stratospheric warming event is currently occurring, or is forecast to occur as we go forward. You can see that the polar vortex, as we go forward in time, will start to lose its counterclockwise high pressure rotation and instead move towards more of a low pattern. Ultimately, this serves to it tries to advect cold air down into our neck of the woods. Unfortunately, we're going to take a look at some of these zonal ensemble models, and we move forward in time. Now, if this, generally speaking, is a wintry pattern, we have ridging across the majority of our of the northern tier of the North American subcontinent, and then we have troughing going in and along the southeast U.S. Now, and we've talked about the need for displacing cold air that was in place over Alaska and Greenland ad nauseum over the past couple of weeks, and that seems to want to happen, right? But we don't necessarily get it for a long period of time. So we see that majority ridging starts to move off Alaska, troughing starts to come back into a place, and we start to return to that blocking pattern as you move forward more further in time. Also, what's interesting is if we really, as we go forward into next weekend, this is obviously a long-range ensemble outlook, so keep that in mind as well. This low, this would be perfect. I would say this would be perfect if this low, that's right here, was further south, and it was the dominant low, right? That was right here. Right now we got lows that are sitting off. We got lows that are sitting off both sides of the coast, right? That's amplifying this ridging here, taking away a lot of the convectivity of the east coast as well, leaving it largely zonal and pretty much well balanced and stable. That's not going to help in terms of getting us colder air as a whole, nor is it going to give us the energy we need to kick off some big snowstorms on the eastern seaboard if we really wanted them to. So unfortunately, we had a good pattern going for maybe seeing some more like severe cold. Not saying we needed severe cold, but definitely would be nice to get another little shot before the end of winter. But we're coming up on the end, and it's not looking like this February shot is going to be quite as significant as we were originally thinking, and certainly not as significant as the cold shot that we got in mid-January. So a little unfortunate news there, but you know, it is what it is. This is just how weather works sometimes. Taking a look at the European snowfall forecast, you're going to see this bounce around quite a bit. We can see upwards of 8, 9, I think 12, a foot of snow in Hartford, Connecticut is probably a little bit on the high side, but you can see that generalized path. This will definitely change quite a bit over the weekend, whether that alternates more northerly or on the southern portions of the Northeast. That's certainly something to keep an eye on. And then I always like looking at the icon, the new-ish global model out of Germany, just to get an understanding of what they're looking at there. And they're taking more of a northern tier, as you can see, with the majority of I-95 staying relatively just wet and rainy and cold. And then up in the upper elevations in the Catskills and upstate New York and into Vermont, New Hampshire is where you get the snow. So you can see that there's quite a bit of, even just 3, 4, 5 days out, we have quite a lot of low confidence with this particular setup. So definitely something to keep an eye on and study just to see what else we're looking at. AccuWeather did a very good job last time of doing the snowfall forecast, so I want to give them their credit, and I want to look at what their forecasting is currently putting out. They kind of have a little bit of a middle ground here, definitely more higher elevation minded. You can see that they're looking more in the Poconos region and also in the Hudson River Valley and the Connecticut River Valley and the Hudson River Valley. They are generally speaking going to be getting and also the Allegheny Mountains into central PA. Those areas are going to be getting more of the snowfall according to them, and then a dusting. Not dusting. We have 1 to 3 inches in the areas that are pretty much highlighted, even extending out into the Cleveland area. So that's interesting. So that's what we're looking at. Just want to give them their credit for doing a good job in the last go around. And I want to end today by looking at the report that was put out about El Nino and La Nina. This just came out today, actually, and the big news of the day is that the CPC put out a La Nina watch, meaning that things are officially starting to look more and more like La Nina will be the dominant southern oscillative flow as we get into the fall. So we're going to shift from a strong El Nino into a to be determined strength La Nina as we go forward. I just want to take a look at some of these figures. So here we have the average sea surface temperatures of the Eastern Pacific. So we have above average sea surface temperatures over the majority of the Eastern Pacific right now, all the way across the equatorial Pacific Ocean. That much has not really changed, and that just is due to the fact that El Nino is still in place. Looking at the SST anomalies, though, as we look forward in time, and we can see, or actually this is not looking forward in time, this is currently what the current past analogs have been. You can see little dips in the Nino, 3.4, 3, and particularly 1 and 2 regions. Those temperatures have started to decline. So that's usually the first indicator that El Nino is coming to a close when we see those patterns start to surface. An interesting thing, definitely, I would say, is the upper ocean heat anomaly. So this would be taking a look at upper ocean depth. So if we see we see that there's quite a bit of warm surface temperature right here on the eastern side of the Pacific Ocean. This is like a cross section of the ocean, right? But you get down into the 5,100 meter range, and you see those cold anomalies are starting to, those cold pools are starting to inject themselves into the eastern Pacific, and those will gradually start to upwell and work to cool off the eastern Pacific. So the understated, and you can see that by the anomaly chart here, 1.5-ish in November, December was kind of the peak of the El Nino, and then it's just fallen off a cliff back into a much more neutral upper ocean heat anomaly for the time. And if we were to follow that pattern, we would expect it to go below that as we move forward into February, March, and April. We can also take a look at this chart, which we can see from figure 5 here in the average outgoing long-wave radiation anomalies. This, generally speaking, kind of like shows how much, you know, like in the Earth receives solar radiation during the day as it receives sunlight, and then at night the Earth itself radiates long-wave infrared radiation off of its surface, and then the cloud cover that is associated with that either restricts the solar radiation from hitting the surface, or it prohibits the long-wave radiation from escaping the atmosphere during the night. So if we take a look at that, we can see that there were atmospheric anomalies across the tropical Pacific that showed to weaken across January. You can see probably low-level winds were near average across the majority of the equatorial Pacific here. Upper-level wind anomalies were more easterly over the east central Pacific, and then we have convection that remained slightly enhanced, or next to or near the dateline, and was actually close to average around Indonesia, which shifts more into the thinking that the MJO is moving more into a more neutral or phase 8 or null space kind of pattern, and then this all kind of precipitates itself into a weakening El Nino. We can see from the IRI plume here, it's definitely prohibiting, or it's definitely signaling a shift to ENSO neutral by, generally speaking, the mean average is about May, June, July here. And then what else we got going on? And this is the official probabilities. So one of the things that a lot of people look at this graph and they kind of see, oh, well, you know, by the time we get into, I don't know, midsummer, you know, it's looking like a pretty strong La Nina, right? I mean, I would caution you that does not necessarily mean this is a percent chance that this will be the dominant oscillation at the moment of the time. So we can see that by the time we get to April, May, June, there's an 80% probability that we will be in ENSO neutral, 20% chance it will be still in El Nino, not a lot for La Nina, and then we move forward in time, and La Nina takes over about midsummer in terms of probability that it takes over. We're at like a over 50% chance that it takes over by midsummer, and then that ENSO neutral probability keeps going down, but it's still pretty elevated. Only 20% by the time we get into next year, or by the time we get into fall. But just keep that in mind when you're looking at that particular chart. It doesn't necessarily mean that the La Nina is going to be in like full strength. Like I know, like which model is this? This is the COLA CCSM4 model. Definitely wants a more severe La Nina track than the majority of the other ensemble members, but ultimately that is. I'm not looking like it's the dominant probability at the moment. So just wanted to look at what the ENSO. This is the update that the Climate Prediction Center has put out for February 8th. So I just wanted to review that before we finish today. And obviously, when we have a La Nina here in the southeast, we would experience, generally speaking, a much more active hurricane season. And more drought-like conditions in between that. So we would get the majority of our precipitation in the fall months from tropical systems in that particular sense. So depending on how active and how the tropical Atlantic looks in terms of how much dry air is being inserted, how much moisture and convection is being allowed, is there any major wind shear patterns, and because of La Nina is the way it is, typically there is very limited wind shear, which is generally a good thing for hurricane formation. Definitely something to keep an eye on as we move forward into the latter portions of this year. if this guidance continues to show what it is currently showing, and we're currently in a La Nina watch, so it's certainly starting to verify quite a bit. So that's just a review of what we've kind of experienced here over the past few weeks across the majority of the tier. Got a lot of stuff going on as usual, but I'm looking forward to kind of diving into the snow forecast for the Northeast starting on Monday. That's when my next video is planned. Once again, this channel is Great Atmosphere. My name is Zach. Would appreciate your subscription, particularly if you live in the southeastern tier of the United States. That's where I focus the majority of these forecasts. But ultimately, I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you on Monday for another video. Take care.